It's my pleasure tonight to welcome Brandon Warmke, Associate Professor of Philosophy from Bowling Green State University. Philosophers are sometimes criticized for talking about arcane subjects that no one cares about, and sometimes we're guilty of that. But Brandon is as innocent of that as any philosopher that I can think of offhand. He's written on topics like forgiveness, moral responsibility, conservatism, what it is, what it's about, and moral grandstanding. He has a book called Moral Grandstanding, the Use and Abuse of Moral Terms, I believe, or moral language, maybe, something like that, written with Justin Tosi. And he's going to talk to us tonight about moral grandstanding, why status seeking destroys public discourse, and what to do with it, about it. Please welcome Brandon.
Thank you, Dan, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, those of you here in person and online. The political philosopher Michael Oakeshott once said that he didn't trust himself to give a talk without reading it. Now, I don't trust myself either, but I'm going to not read my paper. So we'll see what happens tonight. I want to begin our time tonight in an unlikely place, and that is it, oh, did I mess something up here? Oh, okay. I want to begin in an unlikely place, the comments section of an online recipe blog. This one's called Damn Delicious. So this is where people submit fake recipe, like recipe, you go to Chili's and you like the tacos, you can submit a recipe that you can, copy Chili's tacos. And our story begins in the comments section on a taste-alike recipe for P.F. Chang's chicken lettuce wraps. On this one recipe alone, last time I checked, actually this is like 5 years ago, there were 551 comments. Almost all of them were people fighting. And I want to pick up our story with Donna. And I'm sorry if you can't read this. I did my best. If I make it too big, it gets fuzzy. Don't be fooled. Got food poisoned at P.F. Chang's Pasadena Sunday afternoon eating chicken wraps. Ended up in emergency room for 4 hours. Also, chicken on other meals were overcooked. Food was salty. Also, others in our family had other stomach issues eating the food. Very disappointed in the food, not to mention cost of emergency room, question mark. This is Glenn. Donna, people often think that it was the last place they ate where they got food poisoning from. Do you realize it usually takes 8 to 14 hours after eating for you to get food poisoning? Most likely it was your home-cooked meal you made for your family and not the restaurant you ate at an hour before. Funny how people always try and blame someone else for their own bad cooking. Oh, it gets, no, don't laugh yet, it gets better. This is Liza. Hi, Glenn. If you could refrain from mansplaining to Donna about her own illness, that'd be cool. And on the note of you being a sexist, why would you assume that Donna cooked her last meal? Maybe your assumption has something to do with the fact that she's a woman. And furthermore, how do you know that she cooks for her family or that she even has a family? God forbid a woman do something with her life other than having a family and cooking for them. Your assumptions are disgusting. This is LZ. LZ, Lisa, did you assume Glenn's gender just because of his name? Interesting that you criticize someone for making assumptions by making assumptions. And we'll conclude with Pat. Wow, assume much, Liza? Would you be saying the same thing if you thought Glenn was a woman? It's your assumptions and agenda that are disgusting. You are the one that's sexist. Now, my question tonight is, why is so much public discourse about morality and politics so nasty? You probably expect this on Twitter, on social media, on cable news, maybe in a faculty meeting, but even on a recipe blog, apparently people cannot control themselves. Now, we shouldn't think that this is some sort of new phenomenon. So this is the Austrian philosopher Kurt Beyer. In the 60s, Kurt Beyer writes, "Moral talk is often rather repugnant, leveling moral accusations, expressing moral indignation, passing moral judgment, allotting the blame, administering moral reproof, justifying oneself, and above all, moralizing. Who could enjoy such talk?" But apparently people do enjoy it, even when it gets nasty. Now, I can't explain all of this behavior, and I'm not going to try. But what I want to try to do tonight is convince you that one reason public discourse is so nasty is that people use it to impress others and seek status. And the name that my co-author Justin Tosi and I called this behavior, we just call this use of public discourse moral grandstanding. So here's what I want to do in our time together today. By the way, this is a painting called The Preening Peacock. I love this painting. There's a peacock behind here if you can't see. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to talk briefly about what moral grandstanding is. I'll give you a bit of a primer on the social psychology behind why people behave this way. I'll try to answer the question why people do this, and what does grandstanding look like in the wild. I'll give you a brief field guide to grandstanding. And then I want to give you some reasons for thinking that grandstanding is bad. Talk about some arguments for why it's bad and why we should avoid it. And then I'll close by suggesting some ways to improve our discourse by avoiding grandstanding. Okay, so what's grandstanding? We can start with a kind of bumper sticker version. The bumper sticker version says, grandstanding is the use of moral talk for self-promotion. What do we mean by moral talk? Well, generally, we mean public discourse about moral issues. It could mean discussions about justice, about what people are owed, about who's a bad person, who's a good person, what do people deserve in terms of punishment, and so on. And what grandstanders do is they turn these discussions about morality and politics, these very important issues, they turn these discussions into a vanity project. They turn moral discourse into a way to promote themselves. Now, this is very impressionistic. This is very simple. We do give a more complicated, slightly more complicated description of grandstanding. And you can think of it in terms of an equation. Some of you in the audience are very accomplished mathematicians. I'm not going to try to impress you with my math, but you can think of grandstanding as a simple equation. Grandstanding is just two things. There's two parts of the story. One is what we call the recognition desire, and the other part is what we call the grandstanding expression. So here's the basic idea. Grandstanders want recognition for their perceived moral qualities, or they want people to think certain things about them. It could be that you want people to think that you're really morally good. You want people to think that you're a moral saint, a moral paragon, a moral expert, that you have extremely sensitive moral insight, you're extremely illuminated, when it comes to what's right and wrong. Sometimes you might just want people to think that you meet a threshold. So whereas everyone else is evil and a Nazi or a communist, you are at least morally decent, right? Sometimes grandstanders want to be seen as generally more impressive. They just want to be seen generally as a good person. Sometimes they want to be seen as good in a very specific way. Maybe they want to be seen as caring deeply and passionately for the poor, or they want to be seen as deeply caring, passionately interested in the troops. What's the audience of grandstanders? Well, this just depends. Sometimes people are just wanting to talk to everyone. Sometimes it's anyone online, anyone who might come across my tweet. Sometimes it's some specific group. Often grandstanders want to impress their in-group or dominate an out-group. We'll talk more about that in a second. But the basic idea is they have this recognition desire. They have a desire for recognition for an alleged moral quality that they may or may not believe they have. And in order to accomplish the satisfaction of this desire, grandstanders say something. So this is the thing that you type into Twitter, you say on the podium in a debate, you might say this in a faculty meeting to really get someone to show up, to shut up. But the grandstanding expression is just what you say in order to get people to believe the thing about you that you want them to believe. So you make a statement in an attempt to fulfill that desire. Now, interestingly, most grandstanders just don't come out and say, I am the best person here, shut up. That's a bit too direct. So typically they'll use indirect language, and we'll give some examples of what that looks like. They'll use more subtle ways of suggesting or communicating their moral excellence. Now, human psychology is very complicated. We shouldn't think that when grandstanders say things, they're only motivated by a desire for recognition. A lot of the things we do, we have mixed motivations. We're very complicated psychologies. And so we don't want to say that grandstanders have one and only one desire. But we do say that that desire has to play a significant causal role in leading them to say what they say. And we give a bit of a test. We call this the disappointment test. So the idea is, if you're about to say something, would you be disappointed if someone read what you said and didn't come away believing what you want them to believe about you? Would you be disappointed? Would you be disappointed if you didn't get to satisfy the recognition desire? If you would be disappointed, that's a rough and ready heuristic for thinking the desire is strong enough, that you really are invested in impressing other people. So notice, let me go back here. Notice that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to look at what someone says and infer that they're grandstanding. So you can't just look at what someone says and say, oh, that's a grandstander, because of this recognition desire. Yeah, you gotta know what's in someone's head. So it's kind of like lying in this respect. You can't typically know whether someone's lying just by looking at what they say. You have to know, are they trying to deceive you, right? Just saying something false isn't lying. So grandstanders might say this thing out of a recognition desire. Someone else might say the exact same thing because they're telling a funny story. Okay. Now, why do we grandstand? Now, the story here is a bit complicated, but the basic idea is we desire social status. Among our basic human motivations, sex, food, shelter, love, friendship, one of the things that psychologists tell us is really important to us is social status. And some recent work in social psychology by Joey Chang and colleagues suggests there are two ways to get status. One way to get status is by prestige. So prestige is basically getting status because of your knowledge, your skills, your abilities. So in the ancient world, it was like you could get high prestige status by knowing how to take down a boar, or knowing how to make shoes, or knowing how to lead the tribe. That would give you prestige status. Now you might get prestige status for being a world-class tennis player, or knowing how to, use the stock market to make money, or being a brilliant, environmental economist. These are ways that you might get prestige status. But there's also as it were, a more worrying kind of status that you can get, and this is dominant status. So dominant status involves people being afraid of you, intimidating people. And in the olden days, this might meant people being afraid that, if they do something wrong, you'll bash their head in, drag them to their cave and eat their flesh and bones. That would be a kind of dominant status. Now you might be afraid of someone hitting you, or you might be afraid of someone embarrassing you on social media, calling you bad names, trying to get you fired. That's one way that people can get dominant status now. And the idea is just that people use moral discourse to try to get social status. So Justin Tosi and I have paired with a psychologist, Josh Grubbs, and some of his colleagues to run about 6 or 7 studies with about 6,000 participants. And the idea that's come out over and over again is that people do indeed use discourse to try to get social status. It's actually very much more common for people to seek prestige status than dominant status. So if you think about grandstanding, the kind of grandstanding that's like, look at me, look how great I am, look how awesome I am, that tends to be the more prestige version. The more dominance version of grandstanding is sit down, shut up, you fascist, Nazi, like I'm going to get you fired. That, using those kinds of words to sort of puff yourself up or get on the status hierarchy, that's going to be a use of dominance motivations in your grandstanding. Now, interestingly, just a couple of previews about the empirical work. Turns out, you might be curious, do people on the political right or left do this more? No. As it turns out, it's almost a perfect U-curve. So if you are the political middle, chances are you're probably not grandstanding a whole lot. The more extreme you are on the right and left, you're probably going to grandstand more commonly. People who have narcissistic, score high at narcissistic extroversion, those people are going to be more likely to grandstand for prestige. People who are high in narcissistic antagonism are going to be often using moral talk for dominance. We found that men are slightly more inclined to grandstand than women, young people more than old, and there's some other demographic stuff in there that's interesting. But the idea that is that, the average person on social media is probably grandstanding once a week. That's sort of the idea. And there are people who are doing a lot more than that, right? They're the people at the edges. Okay. Now, what grandstanding isn't? It's good to clear up some confusions here. Grandstanding is not just any old claim that you disagree with. So often you'll see people accuse others of grandstanding, say you're just grandstanding, and what they mean by that is I don't like that. I think that's false. Okay, but grandstanding isn't just anything you disagree with. Nor is it any false claim. You can grandstand and say true things. For example, I can't believe you said that. That makes me want to vomit. That could be true. Okay, that doesn't mean it's not grandstanding. So you can say true things, false things, grandstand, doesn't matter. Claims you suspect are insincere. Now, a lot of grandstanding probably is insincere. People don't really believe what they say. But nothing about our account rules out what we call sincere grandstanding, which is people believing what they say. Right? So you might genuinely believe what you say. It's just that you're saying it significantly because you want to impress other people. Now, the elephant in the room, virtue signaling. When Justin and I first started writing the original paper that turned into the book, believe it or not, this term really didn't exist in common parlance, okay, back in 2014. This has not been with us very long, okay? If you go 2015, 16 is really when it picked up in public discourse. And so people will ask us now when we describe this project, oh, you mean virtue signaling? And we have been stubborn and said, no, we don't mean virtue signaling. And grandstanding, it has an older provenance. It dates back to the 1880s in books about baseball. Let me just give you 2 brief reasons why we actually think virtue signaling is not a very clarifying terminology for the phenomenon we have in mind. One reason is, if you think about how economists, psychologists, biologists talk about signaling, often signaling means the entity, the animal, has the thing being signaled. So a peacock's massive, colorful feathers do signal something. They signal biological fitness. Okay. Sometimes you can signal things without having the trait, right? You can give a false signal, right? A dishonest signal. So there's honest signals and dishonest signals. The term virtue signaling obscures that. Okay. And in our view, the grandstander may or may not have the traits in mind. They may be an excellent person. What matters is that they are trying to impress other people. Here's another difference. The peacock is not trying to grow those feathers. That is an honest signal of biological fitness, but they're not like, grow, boys, grow. That's not what they're doing. It just happens. And so some signaling is not intentional at all, but in our view, grandstanding involves some sort of attempt or desire or intention. And so for those reasons and others, we've gone into other places. We think this term is just not that helpful. Although if most people, if they say to us, oh, do you mean virtue signaling? We say reluctantly, sure. Okay. Now, what does grandstanding look like? I want to give you a field guide to 5 different common forms of grandstanding. There's lots of different ways that people might try to go about seeking social status for their alleged moral qualities. I'm not going to catalog all of them. I'm going to give you 5 general kinds. Although I do need to warn you, there's a sort of common misimpression here that people, if you see someone doing this, it is grandstanding. That's not the inference we want you to draw. It's that grandstanding often takes these forms. There are, as it were, innocent forms of all of these behavior that aren't motivated by the recognition desire. And this is why grandstanders are very, very tricky, right? Because they're exploiting common discursive behaviors, but they're using them to seek status. And the first one, the first form of grandstanding is piling on. Many of you have had this experience or seen someone do this. This is probably not going to be new to you. Piling on in general is when people use discussions on moral and political issues to make themselves look good. Frequently the driving force behind online shaming, although there are sort of like positive versions of this. So you might engage in what I call a praise pile-on, where you're agreeing with something just because you want to be seen as being on the right side. So you might say something like this. This is a bit forced, but to get clearer on the issue, you might say something like, I want to echo what others have said. This petition is vital to the cause of justice, and I happily and wholeheartedly support it. We need to show that we are on the right side of history. I cannot wait to sign. That's something a grandstander might say to pile on in this positive way. But a lot of grandstanding is what I call a blame pile on, where people use the real or imagined moral errors of others to sanction them, to make themselves look good. They use people as interchangeable punching bags to show how much they care about morality or justice. So you might say something like, you're despicable, delete your account. That you can imagine a grandstander saying that to show everyone like, oh yeah, that's horrible. I don't like that. I'm distancing myself from that. I cannot even, deign to have this person in my presence. And there's some interesting psychological reasons why people engage in this behavior. We can talk about that during Q&A, but in order to keep moving on here. A second form that grandstanding often takes is what we call ramping up. Ramping up is when people turn moral discourse into an arms race, where people make increasingly strong claims about the matter under discussion to outdo one another. So here's an example of how these conversations might go. One person says, we can all agree that the senator's behavior was wrong and that she should be publicly censured. Someone else chimes in, oh, please. If we really cared about justice, we should seek her removal from office. We simply cannot tolerate that sort of behavior, and I will not stand for it. And someone else might chime in. As someone who has long fought for social justice, I'm sympathetic to these suggestions, but does anyone know the criminal law on this issue? I want to suggest that we should pursue criminal charges. We would all do well to remember that the world is watching. So you can see in these sort of arms races, people attempt to outdo one another. They turn moral discourse into a kind of competition. Who can be the most pure? Who can care for the poor or the troops the most? So this turns moral discourse into a moral arms race. There's some interesting psychological mechanisms going on here. One of them is the better than myself effect, or the better than average effect. People tend to think they're morally better than the average person. And so if you think that you're better than the average person and someone chimes in a conversation, they're going to look like the morally good person. Now, we also, there's psychologists tell us we engage in what they call social comparison, which is how we think of ourselves is often partly determined or depends upon how we compare to others around us. So, you know, like I'm really funny at home with my parents. I'm the funniest guy there. Then I go hang out with my friends, I'm not as funny, right? So if someone pipes up and says this like really highfalutin moral thing, they now get the credit for being the moral person. And now if I think of myself as being extremely dedicated to morality, I have to either let them get pride of place or I have to outdo them, okay? And so these two sort of psychological mechanisms often lead us to try to use morality to outdo others. Third, we name no relation. We named this before, everything. Trumping up. So in the sense of trumping up charges. So this happens when grandstanders insist on a moral problem where there is none. And it functions to show that the morally respectable person, the moral grandstander, has a keener moral insight than others. Whereas some alleged injustices fall below the moral radar of the hoi polloi, they are not missed by the vigilant eye of the grandstander. And the fact that others overlook this wrong is evidence that they're less morally impressive than you are. And some of you are familiar with Hans Christian Andersen's Princess of the Pea. This is basically the moral version of that. So in this little story, we test the princess's royal credentials. She, can she feel a single pea under 20 beds and 20 mattresses? She can. This is a test of her royalty. Yet some people attempt to establish their moral credentials by displaying a similar degree of sensitivity to moral problems. So this, you might remember this. I think this is, I don't know what year this was, 2013, I think. So President Obama gets off, I think, like Marine One, and he salutes the Marines with a coffee cup in his hand. And some people lost their minds at this. In fact, I'll quote you one prominent TV personality, we'll see if you can guess who this is later, who said, "The idea that I'm going to just jaunt out there with my chai tea and give them the old, I mean, please, how disrespectful was that?" So just to really get exercised about this sort of thing, you really have to want to show people that that you're not going to let anything pass. Like this is, it's one thing to privately think, okay, maybe that was a break of decorum or something like that. But to get on TV and to pontificate, you really got to care. No. Fourth, grandstanding often manifests itself in excessive emotional displays or reports. And often grandstanders use these emotions to show that they are especially caring or affected or tuned in. So the psychologist Linda Skitka has this idea of moral convictions. Your moral convictions are the things that deeply matter to you. You really care about these things. And people have stronger emotional reactions to discussions of their moral convictions. So maybe abortion is one for you, or immigration. You might have these deep moral convictions. And when they come up, people who have these deep moral convictions express stronger emotions than they do about other topics. Okay. Even when you control for religiosity and attitude extremity, people get exercised and angry when you talk about these moral convictions. And what happens is grandstanders exploit this background assumption that we all understand and employ outrage to signal that they are more affected by moral disorder in the world, or they empathize more fully with victims of wrongdoing. Sometimes the attitudes are negative, right? It could be outrage. I am absolutely outraged, sickened. I want to vomit. Sometimes the emotions are positive. When someone reports, for example, being so in awe of someone for his costless stand on some moral issue among his like-minded friends. And the last one is grandstanders are often extremely dismissive. So, for example, any suggestion of doubt or uncertainty reveals a moral defect in your character or your commitment. When people talk as if their views are utterly obvious, anyone who has doubts or disagrees is beneath contempt and should be ignored. So, for example, someone might say, if you cannot see that this war is just, then your views are beneath contempt, and I refuse to engage with you any further. And if you don't understand why, I'm not going to waste my time explaining it to you. Do better. Now, sometimes it's obviously okay to dismiss various views and not discuss them. Like, should we discuss, was this, tragic thing, like, was it okay or not? Well, we don't need to discuss every issue. But grandstanders use this tactic to make themselves look like they're above having to give reasons for their views. Okay, they're very dismissive. Okay, so yeah, this is just obvious to any decent person. Now, what's so bad about grandstanding? Now, with apologies to the philosophers in the room, I'm going to simplify things, Matt, in a few ways. One way that you might complain about grandstanding is you might say, well, grandstanding is disrespectful to others. It free rides on the norms of public discourse. It treats people as interchangeable punching bags, and that's disrespectful. And we have lots of arguments for that. I'm not going to talk about those today. You might also think that a virtuous person wouldn't grandstand. A virtuous person who engages in public discourse would be motivated by duty or altruism. They wouldn't be motivated by egoistic concerns. I'm not going to talk about those arguments either. What I'm going to do today is just briefly outline a few consequence-based arguments. In other words, the idea here is that grandstanding has significant social costs. And I want to be clear, just because grandstanding, I mean, even if we're right, the grandstanding has bad consequences, that doesn't mean that overall grandstanding is bad or should be avoided. The idea is to sort of create a presumption against grandstanding. Now, some of you are already like, well, of course this is bad, but not everyone thinks this is bad. In fact, there's a philosopher who recently wrote a paper called Virtue Signaling is Virtuous. And so evidently, I still have work to do to convince some people that the grandstanding is bad. Here's one reason why grandstanding is bad. We theorized this in the book, and then we did some studies, and it looks like we were right. Grandstanding causes polarization. And particularly we have in mind, and some of you might have heard of the idea of group polarization, which is the idea that when people get together and discuss, they tend to walk away with more extreme views than they had before. And you can see why grandstanding might lead to polarization. Because if you have a group over here having a conversation, trying to outdo one another, they're going to arrive at more extreme views. And if you have people on the other side of the political aisle doing the exact same thing, they're going to arrive at more extreme views too. Now you might think, well, what's the purpose? Or what's the problem with this? I mean, simply having an extreme view doesn't make it wrong. I mean, some extreme views might be right. So the mere fact that grandstanding causes people to have extreme views doesn't seem to be the problem. The problem, however, is that what's pushing us apart is not good evidence or good arguments. It's that people want to impress each other. And how likely would it be that we hit upon the right answer to some political or moral question by this method? Say the thing that will impress people. Probably unlikely to track the truth. And so what happens is people are taking on positions that are more and more extreme that are less likely to be truth tracking. They're not going to follow the evidence or reasons. People have incentive to stop saying things when what they say stops impressing people, not when it's responsive to the reasons or arguments. So it leads to false beliefs. Also, it leads people to be overconfident. So if both sides, as it were, are becoming more extreme, and let's say you're on this side of the aisle and you look at the other side, maybe you have some concerns about your view, getting a little extreme, guys, but you look over at the other side and you think, well, if that's the only option, then my side clearly is right. And people become more confident that their own views are correct because the other side becomes less and less attractive as an alternative. So that's a problem. And overconfidence makes it much harder to compromise too. I mean, if the only alternative to your side is literal evil, you're not going to want to compromise. And you got to compromise in democracies. Second, we've run some studies that suggest, and this might not be surprising to you, people who grandstand more report more conflict in their personal lives. So turning the public square into a moral arms race breeds competition and disrespect, punitiveness, anger. And so it's we think it's a good reason. So basically this is like affective polarization. So those of you who are familiar with that, you're more likely to hate the other side, hate the out group if you're a grandstander. Maybe that's not surprising to you. Third, a phenomenon that we call outrage exhaustion. And the idea here is that when you use outrage to show how good of a person you are, you dilute the value that outrage has in general. So you might think outrage is good. The problem isn't outrage. Outrage is good. We should be outraged about the bad things in the world. But people have a more difficult time recognizing when outrage is a reliable signal of injustice if it's used for everything. Right? It becomes a less reliable signal of actual outrage. And furthermore, it becomes more difficult to muster outrage when it's actually appropriate if you use it for everything. So the basic idea is if everything is outrageous, nothing is. Okay. So suppose you're convinced by this or some of this, or you read the book and you think, oh, this seems right. Grandstanding is bad. We shouldn't do it. It has all these bad effects. What should we do? Well, first of all, I want to suggest what we shouldn't do about grandstanding. Often the response that I get from people in these sorts of talks or from philosophers is like, here's what they want. They want to monitor, they want to test, to like figure out who's grandstanding. They want to be a cop, right? All these people turn into cops all of a sudden. They're like, okay, who's the grandstander and how do I call them out? And they're extremely disappointed when they read the book and find that we say, don't do that. Don't call people out for grandstanding. There's a lot of reasons for this. One reason is it's unfair to do this because it's very hard to tell whether people are grandstanding. In lots of controlled studies, people are barely better at the flip of a coin at identifying liars. Okay. And we're probably no good at identifying grandstanders. And so it's unfair to go around calling people grandstanders if they're actually not. You probably aren't entitled to call them that. You don't have good enough evidence. So it's hard to be sure someone is grandstanding. It's also just practically unwise to go around, here's what's going to happen. Oh, stop grandstanding, you grandstander. And then someone says, oh, well, you're the grandstander. And now we have a discussion about like the purity of your heart and like what your motivations are. And then it's a forum for more grandstanding. And the next time that ends up being a productive conversation will be the first time. Okay. So this is just not a good idea. It's 100% certainty you will be accused of grandstanding for calling them out. And so practically speaking, it's just not a very wise way of dealing with the problem. What should we do? Oh, I also want to mention grandstanding can fall prey to what we call conceptual drift. Once grandstanding is seen as a way of calling people out or criticizing people, basically anything turns into grandstanding. So this happens with mansplaining, for example. This happens with gaslighting. These terms that have very specific meanings, very specific purposes. It's like you disagree with me, stop gaslighting me. Okay, so these terms turn into these, they balloon out because they're rhetorically useful, and we don't want that to happen to grandstanding. So don't do that. Okay, so what should you do? If you can't call people out, it's like, what's the fun in that? Okay. And basically, we have two suggestions here. One is to sort of not grandstand yourself. And in the book, we give a lot of like, empirically informed tips and tricks to sort of like clean up our behavior. But one thing you can do when you're about ready to tweet something or Facebook something or say something is ask yourself, am I trying to do good with my moral talk, or am I trying to look good? And I've actually found this to be a surprisingly simple and helpful test. Like literally asking myself, like, why am I doing this? Am I just trying to like own someone or to look good? And I found that this, I probably doesn't catch all of my grandstanding, but I think it does filter out a lot of potential abusive moral talk. So that's one way. You can also redirect your recognition desire. Like we aren't arguing that you should stop seeking status. Like that seems like a very implausible thing to tell people to do. Like stop caring what people think about you. That doesn't seem fair. But look, we're arguing that public discourse is not the context to seek status. So if you want to be seen as morally impressive, do something morally impressive, right? Cheap talk is not morally impressive. This is not morally impressive, not usually. So even if you're doing something in large part because you want people to like you or be impressed with you, at least you're still doing something good. You're going to go to a soup kitchen and take a selfie to impress people. At least you're helping people. Okay, so redirect the recognition desire. That can be a positive way to satisfy those desires. But you might think, well, how can we make public discourse healthy? I talk to 5 people a week about this. Like I have a lot of work to do, right? If personal change is the only way we get to do this, how can we improve discourse? Well, one way to disincentivize grandstanding is to stop rewarding behavior that you suspect is grandstanding. So this is not calling people out. It's simply being withholding. So you see someone make some, highfalutin moral statement that you think, that seems a little grandstanding to me. Don't give them the praise, the attention they seek. And you might think, well, isn't that mean? Well, it's no more mean than you not being on social media at all, right? So they're not losing out. They don't deserve your likes, your retweets. And so you're simply ignoring people. And the idea, imagine like writing this long like Facebook post about Oberlin College, did this, or, Trump did this, and like this long, and then like one like. For a lot of us, that's going to be a little embarrassing or a little humbling. And maybe not for narcissists, but, for a lot of us, we might think, that doesn't feel good. Maybe I won't do that again. And secondly, we do think it's okay to make fun of the general practice of grandstanding or status seeking, to promote private feelings of embarrassment. So the idea is not to call people out, but to try to slowly change the social norm so that it does look like something embarrassing to do. Okay. And when we speak to one another in the public square about important moral and political issues, we use moral talk. I want to conclude by encouraging you to think of moral talk as a tool. It allows us to work together to make sure people are treated with respect. It's been used on some impressive moral projects. But like many tools, moral talk can be put to alternative uses. Some of these uses are less than admirable. Consider the hammer. Hammers can be used to build homes. They can also be used to hit people. Whether swinging a hammer is a good thing depends on what it's being swung at and why. And like hammers, moral talk can be put to good use. But moral talk is not magic. It can be used in ways that disrespect others or hurt social discourse. And I've argued that moral grandstanding is a way to abuse moral talk. And our public discourse would be better if there was less of it. No one over the age of 3 would cheer every swing of a hammer, nor should we cheer every instance of moral talk. Thank you.
Very much, Brandon. To those of you, I'm going to be taking questions both for people here and in the virtual audience. If you are in the virtual audience, if you mouse down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A function, and you can ask questions there. And I'll alternate back and forth. So
Thanks. That was really very illuminating. One thing I was wondering is whether grandstanders typically satisfy that desire for recognition. What I would assume is that particularly that attempt to dominate others with moral discourse would not be very productive towards their goal of having recognition. I think sort of the Stalinist purges, the best defense apparently in face of the accusation that you were disloyal was to accuse other people of just being disloyal. But this didn't save a lot of lives, it just led to this massive purge. So I wonder whether the same thing happens with grandstanding. They don't even get what they're trying to get.
Yeah, so the question is how effective is grandstanding? That's a great question, and I don't know. I mean, we haven't tried to do that empirically, try to test that or explore that empirically. I can give you some impressionistic remarks. And one is that there are a lot of people who it's hard to imagine would have the social status they do if their grandstanding wasn't successful. And that might come across a little cynical or skeptical, but I think it's not the quality, it's not the quality of their work. It's not their kindness. It's not their open-mindedness or other intellectual virtues. It's they use language that they know can influence and persuade people who might otherwise already be inclined to be impressed, So, I mean, I would be shocked if a lot of grandstanders weren't getting what they wanted. Now, your question raises a nice point, which is that, you can be bad at grandstanding. And I suspect that narcissists, people who score high on narcissism, are very good. And they're not going to impress everyone, but they know what plays to the in-group especially. And I suspect you're right that dominance-motivated grandstanding is probably less effective. It's also much more rare than the prestige-motivated sort. But then you see people on Twitter who are absolutely horrible in defense of their moral views, and people seem to love it. And so, I don't know. If you're a social scientist, this is like an entire dissertation research project. So, I mean, not you in particular, but like for anyone, I mean, this is like, I don't know how to test that, but it raises the question, can there be good and worse grandstanders, and how good are the good ones? And I suspect they're very good. Yeah.
Here's a question from the virtual audience. One of the reasons for not calling out alleged grandstanding was that it's very difficult to know when someone is really grandstanding. But if that's true, then how is it that you know that grandstanding is done?
Good. So this is a great question. So there's a couple ways to answer this. One is with the comparison to lying. So in any individual case, it's very difficult to know whether someone's lying to you, as opposed to just saying something false. And there's all these studies that show basically, even when you can see the person standing in front of you, it's very hard to know whether someone's lying. And so should we conclude from that no one knows that anyone ever lies? That doesn't seem to be the right inference to draw. So then how do we know people lie? Well, we've done it ourselves. We've caught people in lies. People have admitted their lies. We've studied deception and all these sorts of things. So there's other mechanisms than just like looking at what someone says and determining whether they're lying or not. Or think about bragging. It's often difficult to know whether someone's bragging. But we wouldn't want to say, therefore, that we can't tell that anyone ever brags. And so what's our evidence that people grandstand? Well, Justin and I have done it ourselves. So there's that. People have told us that they do it. It would be surprising, in fact, shocking, if people were in almost every other area of their life, seeking status, impressing others, being selfish, being egoistic, in their relationships, at work, right? They're selfish, in business. It'd be shocking if people were sometimes selfish in every other area, but not when they log on to Twitter to discuss politics. That would be quite surprising. And then we have this empirical research that just basically people admit that they do it. So thousands of people evidently will just say, yeah, I sometimes use moral discourse to impress other people. So.
Do you ever think that, to relate to the previous question about whether it's rewarded, do you think there could be an analogy to a financial bubble that basically, as these spirals of grandstanding get going, the value temporarily rises of that grandstanding, but then, as the private embarrassment creeps up, the value drops. Sort of think about like some of the Democratic primary nominees in 2020, listening too much to Twitter and then falling flat a little bit.
I do think that sometimes the moral arms race gets so out of control that grandstanders or alleged grandstanders are self-undermining, where it does look like they're just saying something to impress other people, or people are on to the game, right? So in that sense, I think grandstanding can certainly backfire. Now, I think your question was something different, though. I may have misunderstood.
Well, I guess the analogy to the bubble is that temporarily the value of grandstanding is real, but then the spiral gets to a point.
I see. So like if you're the
term-
first person to say we should abolish the police, that might get you some credit in certain. If you're the 88th person that day, right, in class, is the idea that.
No, it's that if you're, regardless of what order you said it in, say, 2020, now you look like an idiot.
I see.
And so
Yes.
you ran for president, say.
Like the woke thing. It used to be hot, now it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think what typically happens is people just find new things to grandstand about. And so you have these trendsetters in academia and journalists who sort of, they stake out the position and then they see who follows. I mean, academics do this all the time where oh, all of a sudden we're caring about this, like that's the thing. And so I think, yes, I think there's a constant sort of moral entrepreneurship where you have to keep creating new goods, new products, so that people can say, oh, I've never thought that was a moral problem before, but they do. And that might suggest that they're seeing something that I'm not. And so there is a kind of moral entrepreneurship. I fear that I'm not quite.
I think that's what QAnon
Yeah.
is. It's a type of moral entrepreneurship. It's
Yeah.
it's a new trick to play on people that there's a conspiracy there. Oh, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the tricky thing is you can't be just some Joe Schmo. Although I guess this is the entirety of Tumblr. Like, Tumblr is just Joe Schmoes, like creating new moral things, and then 3 years later, it's like the platform of some party, And so there is. So maybe I'm wrong. I was gonna say you sort of have to have some status, some gravitas to sort of like be a trendsetter. And I think oftentimes you do, but clearly there are counterexamples, like just a bunch of people saying something anonymously on Tumblr has this massive effect like 5 years down the road. And I think there's a sort of a constant sort of like, entrepreneurship is the best term for it.
Since social media has come up a bunch, we have a question about that here, which is, do you think grandstanding in public discourse is due to individual foibles or environmental incentives?
Oh,
Social media sites like Twitter and Instagram are designed to feed our recognition desire. Perhaps the best way to combat grandstanding is to change the environments that are designed to encourage it.
good. So a couple things. I think that grandstanding is a human problem. I think that status seeking and egoism, these are all just, as it were, sort of features of human psychology as we know it. I think if you went back to ancient Athens, you'd find people grandstanding, in the center square, the agora. You find ancient people criticizing this sort of behavior. And so I don't think it's anything that's new. It's not like we got Facebook and then grandstanding, we discovered grandstanding. I do think that our technology has made it much easier to grandstand, and it's made it much easier to find it and be exposed to it. So, think about 100 years ago to grandstand. I mean, to have an audience this big 100 years ago, like for a normal person was like unthinkable. Like you go out in the street and scream. You're a preacher, you're a politician, you're a journalist. That's basically the only way to have an audience of 100 people is to be one of those three. Now, anyone can literally just like unlock their screen and talk to 100 people or 100,000 people or 100 million people. And so I think it's just much easier for people to reach a larger audience. It's also just easier to find grandstanding. I mean, 100 years ago, you'd have to like go out and find the people who were doing the talking. That took effort. You had like kids to feed and cows to milk and such. Now it's just like, I did my Wordle. I'll check Twitter, and then I found a bunch of grandstanders. So now, as far as like platform design and like changes to Twitter, that is not something that I'm an expert in. I'm happy to, I'm a humble philosopher, and I'm going to leave that to people who are better equipped to deal with those things. Although I have to say, I am skeptical of attempts to try to hack platforms to sort of overcome these kinds of problems. I suspect there are things you can do at the margin, sort of make things a little better. Like people have suggested, like being able to edit tweets, for example, might help in some ways. But again, I'm not an expert in that, and I don't want to epistemically trespass on others.
So a couple of things. One, just question about Nietzsche, because it certainly seems that to think back about, his masterpiece on the genealogy of morals, it seems like his whole critique of the priesthood is a critique of grandstanding. He's basically, now that I'm thinking about this back through your language, yes, he would say that's exactly what the priesthood is doing. They're moral grandstanders. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, in fact, we have a whole section in the book on Nietzsche and grandstanding. Yeah,
Jesus was a grandstander in a sense because he was saying only through me can you get to heaven and that sort of stuff. It was sort of like potentially the grandstander, and the monks who are writing this were sort of moral grandstanding. I mean, that's kind of his basically the fetishization of self-denial.
I was with you until Jesus.
Yeah. Well, you could even go that far because he was, in a sense, saying the only way you're going to get through is through me. Whereas with Muhammad, he's saying, well, no, you get it through all these other ways.
Good. So I'm not going to try to psychologize Jesus.
Well, sure. Yeah, I didn't think.
But
one might.
But on the Nietzsche point, absolutely. I mean, Nietzsche would find political culture and the status seeking using morality. I mean, he would find it repulsive, disgusting. I mean, he has several parts in Beyond Good and Evil and Thus Spake Zarathustra. I mean, he basically just like, he's destroying grandstanders by a different name. And he's basically he says, look, we love to overcome obstacles. You don't feel successful if everything was super easy to you. Like if you could like write today a little 6-line poem and win the Nobel Prize, that wouldn't be satisfying to you. You want to overcome obstacles. And so we have this will to power. We want to sort of like overcome our obstacles because we're animals. We want to overcome our obstacles and get our goals. Some people are able to overcome their obstacles by actually being successful, writing great poetry, making great music. For Nietzsche, it's like Bach, Beethoven, Goethe, and Nietzsche. Like that's it. Like those are the people who really did something with their lives. But for the rest of us who can't do those things, we have to find other ways. And so we use morality to do that. And so we use morality to exercise our will to power over other people. And Nietzsche thinks this is just disgusting. You invent this morality so that you can dominate, call them evil, because you're weak. You can't get what you want.
So this follow-up on solutions. So you say you don't really know much about solutions as far as the social media aspect, but I think historically, again, it would seem, and I think Jonathan Haidt's he's working on a book on this, right? This metaphor is the Tower of Babel that we find ourselves in. So it seems to me that we could probably examine history, and we could say that social media has made grandstanding more, and narcissism, right, more prominent. I mean, many psychologists believe that now narcissism has become, just a normal trait of culture, for better or worse. And that then, therefore, we could maybe from that deduce a kind of correction. And that would be one that I think Heidi is pointing to, and that is to get our kids a bit more on social media.
Yeah. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. Yeah. By the way, I was glad when I think he started a Substack called Tower of Babel. And I was pleased because one of my heroes, Michael Oakeshott, wrote 2 separate papers called the Tower of Babel, because he thought this was just like one of the most important myths is this coming together and trying to figure things out. So, yeah.
I have to say, I love Nietzsche, but like praising him as an identifier of moral grandstanding seems like an opportunity to call hypocrite. That's something to ponder over. But I think I wanted to pick up on something else, which is like, seems like the core of your argument like is perfectly reasonable, that we can go out and use this taxonomy, but it seems like there's a long sort of like gray area in which, like, like Nietzsche, it's like, yeah, he's got a good point about like late 19th century Europe, but like also, I mean, like it's a bit much, right? I mean, it's a little bit over the top, right? He would be up there in terms of like grand standards. But I also think like are we gonna like, is this like a theory well applied to like the giving pledge, right? So like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if it doesn't do anything, like, aren't they just obnoxious rich people, right? I don't know. I mean, it seems like it is a kind of grandstanding. It doesn't really fit like intuitively, like within the realm of like Twitter, but like it's obnoxious, right? Like, I don't know. Like, is it efficacious? Like, or is it just like, yeah, like Maureen Powell Jobs is like pretty rich and she's a little bit less rich because she gives to the Atlantic or whatever, right? I mean, that's not the case.
So is the worry that, just so I understand, is the worry that maybe not all grandstanding is as bad as I've made it sound, or?
I think like, there's like, I mean, I think you didn't rule out the benefits side of grandstanding, but I don't know. I think like disproving, like, I mean, that the benefits are small seems like a stronger case for indicting grandstanding. Good.
So it seems to me that you're perfectly correct that a lot of grandstanding is annoying, at best annoying. It's not sending the ship over the cliff. Now that's okay. Lots of lies are white lies. Does that mean lying is generally okay? No. So I think there's some grandstanding that's very, very destructive. So, the piling on, trying to get people fired, like that stuff's really serious. And there's stuff that's, maybe the grandstanding equivalent of a white lie. And we also don't rule out, the good pluralists that we are, that, grandstanding might sometimes be the best thing to do. Like, you might think lying, sometimes you should lie. And grandstanding in some cases might be the thing to do. Our goal, and you're right, that, if you, in the book, we do go through some of these benefits of grandstanding, and we say, grant them. We think that on balance, the costs outweigh the benefits. Oh, and also we have these other respect-based and virtue-based arguments too. And so it's like, here's a smorgasbord of arguments. You have your work, not you, but you got your work cut out for us if you want to defend using moral discourse for self-promotion. And yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world, but we do think it does significant harm. Yeah.
A question from the virtual audience is, do you have evidence that your excellent work is having an impact? Or are you okay with doing research that is intrinsically interesting and even as grandstanding?
I do have excellent evidence that our work is making an impact, which is that it angered lots of academics. Should I leave it at that?
An example or two would be good.
No,
Without naming names.
this is being recorded, Julian. I
Without naming
can't.
names.
I can't. We do have people write us, students write us, and thank us for writing the writing the book, and I think the main point in this entire project as a philosopher was to sort of try to give people the resources to understand something in their experience. I think philosophers can be good at this. It's like there's this thing happening. We all kind of feel it's happening. We don't really have a nice theory of what's happening, and I think to sort of show up and try to impose some philosophical care and structure on what people are experiencing, I think that can be helpful. I also do worry that we're making things worse. I don't worry about that too often. I'll just take a nap real quick, just get over it. But, I sometimes worry that we're making people too cynical about discourse. I mean, that's one criticism, is that we're talking about grandstanding. In fact, we even argue that grandstanding causes cynicism, right? If people are engaging in moral discourse for self-promotion, then you're going to take moral discourse less seriously. But you can just level that argument against us too. And we're going around talking about grandstanding all the time, won't shut up about it. Aren't we making people more cynical? And I think that's a fair concern.
I was just wondering if you could go back to that first exchange on the recipe page.
Oh yeah?
And do a little close reading.
You want to do a Straussian reading of the recipe blog?
Well, I'm interested in your distinction between prestige motivated and dominance motivated grandstanding. Because you said that prestige motivated seems to be the more common, except that the examples that you gave, what seems to be implicit in that exchange to me is actually the dominance factor.
Yeah.
It is the piling on that comes through lots of other people agreeing with you, and then also attacking whoever that object of scorn is. So I'm wondering if you could close read it instead.
Is this, which one did you have in mind?
Any of them, I guess, however you would want to start. But I'm interested in that distinction between prestige and dominance, since in some ways all of these do seem like prestige and dominance.
Yeah, what, Jennifer, what makes this also tricky is that these are all virtually anonymous. So this is a bit of a puzzle for our view. It's not like I know or anyone knows who Glenn is. So one criticism that you might have is this is not grandstanding. This is like what the philosopher Paul Russell calls cruel moralism. It's using morality simply to be cruel to people, to punish them. It's not about seeking status, okay? It's not about trying to impress people. And I think there's something to that. I think Paul has a nice point. What I would say is a couple things. One, even anonymous, I think you can grandstand anonymously, because sometimes what we're trying to do is convince ourselves that we're morally good. Am I the kind of person who puts up with this? No, I'm not. You sexist, Glenn. I'm not the person. So it's almost like the audience is yourself, right? And so you're making sure to yourself that you're a morally good person. Now that doesn't really answer your question, which is this stuff prestige or dominance based? I don't really know. I mean, part of why we like to use this little exchange is simply as an example of nasty moral talk in a surprising place. That it's not just like the comment section of the New York Times blog, right? Or on Fox News. This is a recipe blog, right? And people still can't control themselves. And so I don't have a good theory about what's actually going on motivation-wise in these people's heads. What I suspect is that you're right, that there's some mix of prestige striving, some dominant striving and that these things sort of like intermingle, and you know, psychology is very complicated, I'm told. So I don't know.
One quick follow-up.
Yeah.
On the very first post that started, is there any of that going on?
Is there any of,
Donna's post.
oh, this just looks like complaining or something. I don't know.
So it
I mean,
doesn't
what's
begin until- when does it begin?
weird is that this is, so it's on a recipe blog. This is like a Yelp review, right? So it's like not even,
They're not talking about.
it's not even apropos, right? When does the nastiness start? I mean, there is something nasty about this. The nastiness, I do think Glenn's being a little nasty here. I mean, he's being a little preachy, a little moralizing, bit of a busybody. So we're starting to get into sort of that sort of, we're creeping into danger zone.
But it's more gaslighting now, right?
What's gaslighting?
It seems like it's a little gaslighting because he's assuming a whole bunch about what she's doing, how many hours it was and all that.
You know, I'm
He's
reticent.
assuming a lot about her.
That was Liza's point.
Yeah.
He is assuming.
I mean, it does.
We got some Liza defenders. Okay, Liza defenders this side of the room. Glenn supporters over here. We're going to recreate the Estates General split right here in this room. Okay.
Then it gets right there.
I think this is where things really go off the rails. Yeah.
So that's a good example of what you were saying, that you could be right in a way and still be grandstanding.
Yeah, there's a sense in, I have to read this more carefully. I mean, a lot of these are questions. There's a sense in which she could be saying all true stuff. Yeah. I mean, not everything true should be said. I mean, there's just like, this is the rule of, this is being recorded. I gotta be careful. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think how like maybe a non-cognitivist would react to this, because you know, a non-cognitivist is going to say that, well, you know, moral claims don't have truth value anyway. So in some sense, the movement towards like moral grandstanding is just, in some sense, a way of like shedding off all of this bullshit about how moral claims have truth value. And yeah, maybe they'll say, okay, sure, the social costs and everything are bad, good if you don't have them, but there's nothing intrinsically abusive or damaging to moral discourse in this sort of movement towards grandstanding, or just sort of just signaling, I disapprove of you, your view is disgusting, or things like that. Because that's in some sense what a non-cognitivist or maybe a motivist might think moral discourse consists in. So maybe, is it true then that to assume that grandstanding, ignoring the social costs for 1 second, are damaging to moral discourse? Is that in some sense like assuming a kind of cognitivism about moral claims, something like that?
I think it's the first time I've ever gotten that question before. So nice. I'd have to think about this. I think there are some of our arguments, like the polarization leading to false beliefs. And if we're talking about false moral beliefs, that might not hit the target. Now, of course, a lot of grandstanding is about factual claims. What would happen if we abolished the police? What would happen if we emptied the prisons? What would happen if we opened the borders? What would happen if we closed the borders? Those are things people disagree about that need not invoke any moral terms. And so, but I could still imagine people being led to a kind of arms race that reveals maybe a certain purity or commitment to an ideal, and we can just let the moral terms drop out, right? So I am the most patient person. That's not a moral, obviously a moral claim. I care the most about the poor. It's not obviously a moral claim. So I'd have to do some thinking about it, but I suspect that if we were, well, first of all, I can't imagine us all being non-cognitivist, but So like, what would non-cognitivist moral discourse look like?
I like this, do so as well, or else.
Sounds like more grandstanding.
Well, I don't know if I call it moral grandstanding. So here's the interesting thing. I think there's kinds of grandstanding in other domains. Like there are intellectual grandstanders. There are religious grandstanders. You can imagine a kind of like sports grandstander, like ESPN First Take. Like, I know exactly who the best quarterback is. You all, and so I think there can be, so you could have a kind of status seeking using a domain of discourse for status seeking and just sort of like get out the moral stuff. And therefore, if we were all non-cognitivist aliens or something, there wouldn't be, the moral stuff. But I suspect discourse would still be pretty nasty. And I suspect it would in part be nasty because people were using that discourse to impress others and seek status. That's the best I got off the top of my head. That's a great question.
Well, there are more questions, but sadly there is no more time. So please join me in thanking our speaker for.
Thank you all.